What's up, guys? I'm EJ. I'm joined by Kendall, and welcome to our virtual NBA Draft War Room, where today we'll be working on the Toronto Raptors. Shout out to everybody out in the six for checking us out here. Kendall, Toronto Raptors, a team now with a championship pedigree. I think those are teams that when you look at the NBA draft, they approach it in a much different way. Sometimes you'll have teams looking at players that they're looking to develop for 2 or 3 years down the line. Sometimes this will be a kind of team that may look at stashing a European player or international player from anywhere that maybe we're not really looking at as a first-round pick. How do you look at the Raptors' approach to this upcoming NBA draft?
Yeah, I mean, I guess when I look historically at what Masai Ujiri has done, it's been a little bit of a mix. I think he tends to, early in the draft, favor guys that are more high upside but may take a little bit of time. And that could come in all shapes and sizes, all profiles. You know, we as a draft community and fans that have typecast younger players as guys being high upside. But Masai Ujiri had the vision to see a guy like Pascal Siakam, who had been in college for 4 years, or 3 or 4 years, whatever it was in New Mexico State, as a high upside guy. A guy that, look, it may take a little bit of time for him to develop. He's not going to come in right away and dominate, but he saw what he could potentially become. And that's something that, I mean, is kind of a foreign concept in the draft community, that a guy coming into the league, you know, at 22 or 23 could be a guy that can still develop. You know, so that's something that Masai Ujiri has certainly, you know, kind of used during his draft, during his previous drafts. Chris Boucher is another guy that he brought in as a guy that had experience coming out of Oregon, but also was a guy that he's let develop in the system. Isn't a guy that where it was like, oh, he can't play for us right away, so we're gonna cut him. No, he's let him stew in the G League and let him stew, you know, as a third stringer. Despite the fact that if you saw Chris Boucher in the summer league this year, we watched him live in Vegas. That guy could be starting for NBA teams.
Yeah, even when he gets some time and he plays, he's pretty good.
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
and he's one of the free agents. I'm curious what they'll do with him.
Yeah, this guy was dribbling, like this guy was playing point center. I mean, he had none of this ability at Oregon. So, yeah, Masai Ujiri has a unique ability to spot guys that have upside regardless of age. So I think that's something that is important when we look at where this Raptors team may go in this draft.
Yeah, so the Toronto Raptors, again, one of the best teams in the NBA, one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference, finished with a 53-19 record. They hold the 29 and 59 picks in the NBA draft. When it comes to free agency, this is going to be an interesting offseason because they got some big names that are contracts that are expiring. You got Marc Gasol, Serge Ibaka, and Fred VanVleet being one of the big ones in terms of a guy who may end up getting a huge payday, and what Toronto does with him and whether or not they try to retain him is going to be one of the storylines of the offseason. Stanley Johnson also has a $3 million player option. Malcolm Miller is a free agent. You just mentioned Chris Boucher. He's also a free agent along with Paul Watson and O'Shea Brissett. When it comes to team needs, as I said, with Fred VanVleet possibly out the door, backup point guard could be an issue. But also with the free agencies of Marc Gasol, Serge Ibaka, so could front court depth as well. Size in the backcourt also could be an issue because they're playing a lot of small guards. They've been playing a lot of small guards all year. So do they try to get a bigger point guard or a big two guard to kind of complement Kyle Lowry? And then depth on the wing, because really outside of Anunoby and Powell, they really don't have a lot of, at least what I would consider NBA guys. But as you said, Ujiri's got guys on that bench who in 2 years may end up being real good players, and you never know. They're guys some of you guys you never heard of. In some instances,
it's going to be Donovan Mitchell in like 3 years.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, and that's going to be an interesting conversation when we talk about the draft, because Terrence Davis, I think, played really well this year. He's athletic, he's aggressive, he can defend.
Another veteran guy coming out of the Ole Miss.
Yeah, Ole Miss, undrafted,
out of Wichita.
Yeah, exactly.
He finds these guys, and they don't. I mean, Terrence Davis has contributed right away, but he finds these guys that, you know, you aren't like top 5 picks. He turns these guys into rotation players. So it's amazing how he does that.
Yeah, Masai's made a lot of guys a lot of money in the NBA with his player development aptitude rather. Uh, so what do we got here, Kendall? What are you looking at in terms of targets for the Toronto Raptors here at 29?
Yeah, I talked about the veteran player piece. First, I'll start out with a more lofty option. This is if the Raptors feel like, look, the window is starting to close a little bit. We have to be honest. Not to say not to tell Raptors fans they can't win a championship. They can win a championship as early as next year, this year, or whenever. But they've been contenders. But in terms of like this current roster, it may need a retooling. You talk about Van Vliet being a free agent. Do they decide to move off Lowry? It may not be something that a lot of Raptors fans want. I don't know. Not in the pulse of Toronto, of Raptor Nation. Maybe I should call Drake, but they may have to move off Lowry. But if they can move off Lowry and maybe another piece, could you potentially move up into the top 10 in this draft? This is not a strong draft. And if you can, a guy that we've talked about potentially slipping in this draft is Onyeka Okongwu. And I think about Onyeka Okongwu in Toronto. And again, that's lofty. They're at 29 now. And I don't know if they have really any assets to move up to the top 10, but this is not a draft that should be that hard to trade up. It may just take a rotation piece. It may just take OG Anunoby, for example. And that's something that I feel like Onyeka Okongwu in Toronto could wind up being what Bam Adebayo is in Miami. So that's something I would seriously consider if I was Toronto. But if we're going to stay more conservative and say, we're going to just run it back at 29, the old boring method, which Masai has made very lucrative, I might add. I think there are some guys that they can look at 29 that can still give them a nice little punch. I think in the front court, I think you have to look at Xavier Tillman from Michigan State, a guy who's also, a veteran player, a guy who, has been a staple for that Spartans front court the last couple of years.
Yeah.
I think an elite defender, a guy that, I was watching the tape of Xavier Tillman versus Daniel Oturu from Minnesota, and to see, he gave Oturu real problems, a guy who has a really good polished back to the basket game.
Yeah.
Couldn't do much against Xavier Tillman, who's a rock down in the post, lob threat, good athlete, strong, athletic, still has to work on his jump shot. But I think that's where time comes in terms of, being in that Toronto development system. But they're going to need to replace Marc Gasol or Serge Ibaka. Probably Marc Gasol. I don't think Tillman can be a replacement for Ibaka, but for Gasol, I think he could be. But if they do lose Lowry or they lose Van Vliet even, which would be, I think, even worse, I think you also have to look at Devon Dotson, point guard out of Kansas, who I think fits their system better than some of the other point guards that could be available at that time. I think the Raptors, they need a point guard who can play on both sides of the court. Like, you can't have a guard who is inept offensively. There are some guards late in the first round that I feel like, or in the second round, Ashton Hagans, Trey Jones, who could be the best defenders in the draft, regardless of position. That's how pesty those guys are on the ball. But they don't give you any value offensively. And I feel like Masai and Nick Nurse really like having point guards that can make plays. But then you also have to be able to defend, which there are also some other point guards that could be in that region that also don't give you that value. Devon Dotson is one of the few guys in that range that does give you value on both ends of the floor. Kind of similar to Fred VanVleet a little bit, so you wonder is that much of a change of pace? But I think he's a guy that, if you're talking about ready-made point guards in this draft, he might be in the top 5 or 6, even though he's not going to be one of the 5 or 6 first point guards drafted. I think he's a guy that could be a guy who can step in right away and be a contributor off the bench for an NBA team.
I love the way Dotson competes on a night-in, night-out basis. The guy's a fighter.
Downhill guard, man. Gets to the back.
Downhill guard. He's disruptive defensively. I wish he shot it a little better, but he's not a perfect player. I like the way he competes. I think he deserves a shot in the NBA. I think that he's going to make the most of it when he gets there. It's funny you mentioned the trade option real quick. I don't want to just gloss over that. if I'm looking at trade partners in the top 10, I think one of the teams that stuck out to me was Washington at 9. Because if Washington is committed to trying to make Bradley Beal work, and they don't know what the situation with John Wall is, perhaps they try to make a play at Kyle Lowry, and maybe they try to move on from John Wall. I don't know. Don't even get me started on how you would do that, but that could be a kind of team that you may look at and say this is a team that would think about moving into that spot.
If you're Toronto, is it worth it? Take on Wall.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is you need Onyeka Okongwu to slide that far.
Right.
But is there another player who they would be interested to do something like that?
Right. You'd have to be for a player. Like if you're going to talk about the Wall scenario, like it'd have to be for a player that you are certain you can develop into a star. Like it has to be like the Kawhi.
Yeah, because you're taking on Wall. That's
Donovan Mitchell going to Utah type of thing, where you think, oh, this guy's going to come in, but in our system is going to be a star pretty quickly.
Yeah, because when I think about it, you would have to take Wall back in that deal.
Yeah, you take Wall back.
Yeah,
like actually, Chua also is a guy that can kind of fit the Toronto mold a little bit.
That's true too.
But he is almost too similar to Siakam for me. Like where it's like, all right, now you have a little bit of an overlap between him and Siakam. Nothing wrong with that. The Celtics have two wings in Brown and Tatum that are fairly similar, and nothing wrong with that. But it may not be worth it. You know, if you're talking about taking on John Wall, Big O is a different player than Siakam. But
yeah, and look, even if we go way up to 4 in Chicago, I don't think they would trade that pick, but they may be desperate to start trying to win some games, and maybe they don't think another young player is going to help them. Maybe they move Kobe White and the pick, and maybe
I feel like
they get a bit. Yeah, that's true, but maybe
they would like Killian Hayes.
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure. So I like the way you're thinking. That's creative. That's what we want to do in this session. You know, really kind of air out where teams could move up. If we are talking about staying at 29, for me, one of the guys I look at as a target is the guy you mentioned, Daniel Oturu, who I think is a really solid fit for this team. I agree. I think that the front court depth, while the backcourt situation is alarming, I think the front court depth situation is a little more alarming, considering two of the guys are free agents and both of them are kind of old. And I don't, even if you bring them back, I don't know how much longer those guys playing at a championship caliber level, how much longer that's going to be. So I think you're going to have to start looking at getting some players in there who, even if those guys do come back, at least bring some youth to that 4 or 5 spot. And Oturu, as you said, really polished back to the basket game. When I watched the tape of him, I was really surprised at just how good he was for his age to be back behind, with his back behind to the basket. But he also can shoot the ball. He's shown he can be a little turnover prone, which is a little concerning. But some of that you gotta chalk up also to like who he's playing with and the team he's on. He's on a team where he was supposed to do a lot. So I mean, he was getting plays where he's a 6'11", 6'10" on the wing, isolating. That's not something that Toronto's going to have him do a lot, or I don't think any NBA team's going to have him do a lot. But the fact that even in those turnovers that he had that were a problem for him all year, the fact that he also made some unbelievable plays in those isolation one-on-one plays on the wing shows you his versatility, and it seems to be the kind of player you talked about again, Masai getting a player with some raw ability and really crafting that into a star player, or at least a great contributing player. I think Oturu fits a lot of those assets. So I think that he would be a great fit for Toronto. Now, if you are more concerned about the guard situation, which again is concerning considering Lowry's age and Fred VanVleet, his free agency, a guy we talked about in one of our older videos, jahmi'us Ramsey, I think also makes a lot of sense for them too. I think that in many ways he reminds me a lot of Kyle Lowry, a little bit bigger than Kyle Lowry, but irrational confidence, great toughness, can get to the hole, a pit bull, and I think that he also would really fit into that locker room really well. So
yes.
So I think that he would be also a really great fit. And then one more guy I would throw in there too, because one thing I think you mentioned as well is I've seen Masai take guys who also perhaps don't have the great numbers, so to speak, in terms of whether they're playing overseas or in college. He might not always look for the 20-point scorer. Sometimes a guy that averages 8 or 9 points will be a guy that he'll see something in them and say, I can develop this guy into something better. that's why I would keep an eye out on Patrick Williams in this spot too. Patrick Williams, excellent defensive player, and the foundation of a good offensive game. He just wasn't really utilized in that way at FSU. The guy can guard 4 positions, really, at least 3, maybe even 4 on some teams. So Coach Nurse values versatility. The fact that he can get a guy who comes in and going to play defense and give him build multiple spots. I think that Williams could be a good fit.
Patrick Williams is definitely a guy that a lot of people now are high on in this draft cycle. I've seen some people have him as high as, I've heard people talk about him with the Knicks, honestly, but I've heard people talking about him as high as, realistically 13 to New Orleans. Would you trade OG Anunoby for Patrick Williams and say, we're going to hit the reset button at this spot? We've seen teams do that before. Remember, this wasn't a 1-for-1. We're going to swap this guy for a guy at his position. But remember, the Nuggets had Trey Lyles, or the Jazz rather had Trey Lyles, who they were high on, and they traded him for Donovan Mitchell. And people were like, "Wow, the Nuggets were this is a steal. We got Trey Lyles from Utah." And then obviously now the Nuggets are feeling the wrath of that Donovan Mitchell trade in the bubble. But it's still interesting. That you whether or not you feel like Patrick Williams, who I do think would be a good fit in that Toronto system, is it worth it? Is it going to be a Kawhi situation? We move off a good young player that you like OG, for a younger player who could be possibly even better than the guy that you're trading. Could be a Kawhi George.
Yeah, and Williams has seen a lot of movement in recent days and weeks, I would say. I'm not 100% sold he'll go as high as people are saying right now. At least the highest we've seen. You mentioned Knicks, which I think is just ridiculous in terms of the 8th spot. But even I've seen the teens. I've seen the teens a lot, or at least enough to make me think, well, for a guy who I thought was fringe first round, now he's looking like maybe, right out to mid to late first round looks like now. I think there's a chance that you'll get him at 29. I think there's also a chance maybe you move up a couple of spots to get him. If he's not there at 29, I would not trade OG Anunoby to get Patrick Williams. I would not do anything like that. I do think that one of the issues is that they don't have a lot of guys like OG Anunoby. So I think that to me the excitement of adding someone like Patrick Williams is now you have another one of those run and jump guys that they're kind of lacking right now. Because Siakam was that guy for like 2 or 3 years ago. Now he's superstar. So he's not that guy anymore, and now all you have is OG to guard those guys and be that kind of just like amoeba kind of offensive player, junkyard kind of offensive player. I think you need probably another guy who can do that kind of thing. Williams doesn't really give you much stretch ability, but we've seen OG improve his jump shot, and we've seen a million guys come in the league really with not much of a 3-point threat turn into 3-point shooters. I think Williams has a really good mid-range pull-up jump shot. I think he could definitely turn into a 3-point shooter too.
The last name I want to mention, it would be the ultimate Masai, 2 years away from being 2 years away project in this draft for me. A guy I don't think could play next season, but in 4 years, could he be an all-star in Toronto? Aleksej Pokusevski could be an interesting name for Toronto. I'm thinking of Poku for Toronto.
Trust me, if he becomes a star, they'll call Toronto.
Toronto. Yeah, no, Poku is an excellent fit in the Masai Toronto development program, because I don't know. Look, and so was Bruno Caboclo, and how did that work out? But regardless, look, you take a lot of swings, you're gonna miss some of these pitches. But Poku, I don't think he's ready to play right away. But in 2 years, with the skill set that he has and the size and the shooting ability, once he gets more acclimated to the NBA game, the Raptors 905 G League team is one of the best G League programs in the league. Could he be a guy that we look at, as a Marc Gasol replacement in a couple of years? That's somebody I would also throw out there. I'm sure Poku's name will come up a lot more in this War Room series, but Toronto's the first team that I look at and say would make sense for Poku.
Poku is one of the more unique players I've ever seen in any NBA draft, and what happens with him, I'm very fascinated about. What do you guys think the Toronto Raptors should do in this upcoming NBA draft? Make sure you leave a comment and give us your suggestions of what they should do. Do you think Kendall's idea of possibly trading up is a possibility with this team? Or do you think there's a player at 29 that does make sense for them that can fit this team and what they want to do? Leave a comment. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. New Generation Media, that's the channel. We have plenty more of these videos coming for you guys. This is the end of the Atlantic Division, but we'll have more divisions coming up. So again, make sure you stay locked in. New Generation Media, hit that subscribe button so you can know when these videos are coming out. That's going to do it for now, though. So for Kendall, I'm EJ. Take it easy, guys. Peace.